My name is Linda Harper, and I am 68 years old. If someone had told me that the deepest wound of my life would come not from an enemy, but from the daughter I raised, I would have laughed in disbelief. Yet on a quiet morning not long ago, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of black coffee and opened my bank account on my laptop. My eyes locked on the numbers glowing on the screen. $450,000 had vanished overnight. At first, I thought there had been a bank error or maybe a system glitch. But before I could call customer service, my phone buzzed with a text message that made my blood run cold. "Thanks for the house and the car, Mom." A little smiley face followed as if this was some kind of joke. I froze. That message was from Emily, my daughter, the little girl I had adopted when she was 3 years old after her parents died in a car accident. I raised her as my own, poured every ounce of love I had into her, and built my life around making sure she would never feel abandoned again. I read her message over and over, unable to believe what I was seeing. My daughter had not just taken some money. She had drained almost $500,000 in one night, and then thanked me as if I had simply handed her a gift. I told myself to breathe, to stay calm. But as I sat there staring at that mocking text, one truth became painfully clear. The betrayal I felt in that moment was far heavier than any financial loss. Emily thought she had outsmarted me, thought she had finally secured the life she deserved at my expense. What she did not know was that she had just opened a door she would never be able to close again. When I arrived home later that morning, Emily and her husband Brian were waiting in the living room. They sat side by side on the sofa, their faces lit up with satisfaction. Emily dangled a shiny set of car keys from her fingers, while Brian leaned back with a smug grin, as if the world finally belonged to them. The air was thick with their triumph. "Mom, we have something to tell you," Emily began, her voice almost playful. "We bought a house. A beautiful 3-bedroom place with a yard. And of course, a brand new car." She flashed the keys again for emphasis, her eyes daring me to react. I stood still, clutching my purse, forcing my tone to remain even. "And where exactly did the money come from?" Emily tilted her head with exaggerated innocence. "From your account, of course. The savings you always kept for us, for our future. Brian and I figured it was only fair that after all your hard work you help us get started." Brian nodded firmly. "You had the money sitting there, Linda. We thought you wanted the best for your daughter. Isn't this what any parent would do?" My chest tightened. I thought back to the years I had scraped and sacrificed for her. "Emily," I said slowly, "do you remember who paid your tuition when you decided college was too expensive? Or who sold her car so you could buy that green prom dress you just had to have? Or maybe who mortgaged this very house so you could have the wedding you wanted?" "That was different," Brian muttered, shifting uncomfortably. "That was your duty as a mother." My duty. As if raising her, loving her, and giving up my dreams for her was not enough. As if I was nothing more than an endless source of money. Emily crossed her arms and lifted her chin. "Look, Mom, it's already done. The house is in our name, and the car too. You can't undo it. And honestly, after years of acting like we were barely scraping by, I think I deserve this." I looked at her carefully, memorizing the smug curve of her mouth and the pride in her eyes. She believed she had finally won, but she had no idea what kind of game she had just started. I remained silent as Emily and Brian celebrated their so-called victory. They thought they had cornered me, that they had finally broken free from what Emily liked to call my poverty act. What they did not know, what they had never bothered to ask, was who I truly was. For years I had kept my personal life and my professional life separate. To Emily, I was the tired old woman who scrubbed off-ice floors for a paycheck, always worried about bills, always sighing over rising grocery prices. That was the image I let her see. It was simpler that way. I wanted her to grow up without the weight of my responsibilities or the temptation of easy money. What Emily did not know was that behind those long hours I also built something lasting. Brick by brick, late nights after cleaning shifts, I studied business and accounting. Slowly, I created a logistics company that grew from one truck into a fleet, from one client into dozens. I kept my ownership quiet, letting others take the public spotlight, while I managed operations from the shadows. To Emily, I was just Mom. To the world of commerce, I was Mrs. Harper, founder and CEO. So when she drained nearly $500,000, she assumed she had taken from a bottomless savings account I had hidden from her. But she was wrong. The account she raided was not my personal nest egg. It was the operating account of Harper Logistics, the very account used to pay employees, suppliers, and taxes. An account watched closely by auditors and insured by federal regulations. By taking that money, Emily had not just stolen from me. She had stolen from 20 families who relied on their paychecks, from truck drivers counting on gas cards, from clients expecting their shipments on time. Emily smiled that day, thinking she had pulled one over on her poor old mother. What she did not realize was that she had committed a federal crime, and soon the smile she wore so proudly would disappear. The following morning, I sat in my car in the parking lot of Harper Logistics, gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. I dialed Arthur, my lawyer and longtime accountant, a man who had been with me since the early days of the company. When he answered, his voice carried a heaviness that told me he already knew. "Linda," he said, "there's a serious problem. The bank flagged a withdrawal of $450,000. It came from the operating account." "I know," I replied quietly. It was Emily, my daughter. For a long moment there was only silence on the line. Then Arthur sighed. "Linda, that account isn't like a savings account. Any unauthorized use is classified as embezzlement. This isn't just theft, it's a federal offense. We need to act quickly." His words pierced me. Embezzlement, federal offense, my own daughter. What are my options? I asked, steadying my voice. "Two paths," Arthur explained. "We can try to recover the money privately, talk to her, negotiate repayment, make it quiet. Or we file an official report, freeze her assets, and let the legal system handle it. But you need to understand, once we go legal, there's no turning back." I closed my eyes. Memories rushed in. Emily at 3 years old, clutching a stuffed rabbit the day I brought her home. Emily at 12, begging me for new shoes I couldn't afford but bought anyway. Emily at 18, walking across the graduation stage while I cheered louder than anyone. I had given her everything, and yet she had chosen to betray me. Arthur's voice cut through my thoughts. "Linda, what do you want me to do?" I opened my eyes, staring at the reflection of my tired face in the car window. The betrayal stung like nothing I had ever felt, but so did the realization that Emily would never change if I kept shielding her. "Proceed legally," I said firmly. "She has to learn that actions have consequences." "All right," Arthur replied. "Then we start today." I hung up and leaned back in my seat, the weight of my decision pressing down on me. For the first time in years, I was no longer just protecting Emily. I was protecting myself, my company, and the people who depended on me. It was the hardest choice I had ever made as a mother, but the only right one. By the next afternoon, everything was set in motion. The court had approved an emergency order to seize the assets Emily had purchased with my company's money. Officers arrived at her new house in the upscale neighborhood of Willow Creek. Neighbors peeked through curtains as a shiny red car was hauled away on a flat truck, and a large notice was posted on the front door. The beautiful home she had boasted about just 24 hours earlier was no longer hers. It was now evidence in a federal case. My phone began buzzing relentlessly. Calls from Emily, from Brian, from numbers I didn't recognize. I ignored them all, but the text messages kept coming. At first they were angry. "How could you do this to me? You are destroying our lives." Then they turned desperate. "Mom, please call me. We can work this out." Finally they became pitiful. "Please, I'm begging you. I'll give it all back. Just don't let them take me to jail." I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, reading every message with a calmness that surprised even me. For years I had jumped at every demand Emily made, every tear, every tantrum. This time I did nothing. I let the consequences fall exactly where they belonged. That evening, instead of going home to an empty house where Emily might come pounding on the door, I treated myself to something I had never dared before. I went shopping at the most exclusive mall in the city. I walked into boutiques I had only glanced at through windows while rushing between jobs. I bought an elegant black dress, Italian leather shoes, and a handbag that cost more than Emily once earned in 3 months at her receptionist job. The sales clerk's eyes widened when I handed her my platinum business card. For the first time in decades, I wasn't hiding who I was. While Emily and Brian sat in a cheap motel room, their dreams collapsing around them, I sipped champagne in the hotel lounge and planned my next steps. For the first time in years, I felt a spark of freedom. Emily thought she had stolen my future. She had no idea that all she had done was give me back my power. News of the case spread quickly. By the time the trial began, The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters eager to cover what they called the betrayal case. Cameras flashed as I walked past, dressed in a simple black suit and pearl necklace. I wasn't there to make a spectacle. I was there to seek justice. Inside the courtroom, Emily sat at the defense table in a gray suit that hung loosely on her frame. She looked far different from the woman who had strutted around with car keys dangling from her hand. Brian sat behind her, shifting uneasily, clearly wishing he could disappear. When our eyes met, Emily's were full of fear, not arrogance. For a moment my mother's heart squeezed. Then I remembered her mocking message, the pride in her voice when she said the money was hers by right, and I hardened again. The prosecutor, Mr. Davis, rose to deliver his opening statement. His voice was steady, precise. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is not about a misunderstanding between family members. It is about a deliberate, calculated theft that endangered the livelihoods of 20 families employed by Harper Logistics. Over the course of 6 months, the defendant, Emily Harper, withdrew a total of $580,000. She used those funds to purchase personal luxury items, a house and a car, while her mother struggled to keep the company running. His words echoed through the courtroom, leaving no room for confusion. The defense attorney, a young man barely out of law school, tried to counter. He painted Emily as a confused daughter who had grown up believing her mother was poor. She thought the money was set aside for her future, he argued. She misunderstood the situation. This is not the work of a hardened criminal. His tone lacked confidence. Even he knew the argument was weak. Witness after witness took the stand. Arthur, my accountant, laid out the numbers with precision, the dates, the amounts, the steady escalation from small withdrawals to the massive transfer. Brenda, my assistant, testified about Emily's visits to the office. She always seemed uncomfortable here, Brenda said. Mrs. Harper tried to include her, but Emily would change the subject or leave quickly. Then came Rosalie, my human resources manager. Her voice trembled with emotion as she described the chaos caused by the missing funds. We couldn't make payroll on time. Employees thought the company was going under. Some even started looking for other jobs. Each testimony was like another brick laid on top of Emily's crumbling defense. She sat hunched, eyes down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. For perhaps the first time in her life, she could not talk her way out. When it was my turn, I walked to the stand slowly, feeling the weight of every sacrifice I had made as a mother. Mr. Davis guided me with his questions. I told the jury about adopting Emily, about the years of struggle, about the decision to keep my business a secret so she could have a normal childhood. I admitted that I had been too permissive, too eager to shield her from pain, and then I told them about the text message. Thanks for the house and the car, Mom. Those words broke me more than the money ever could. During cross-examination, the defense attorney tried to rattle me. Miss Harper, isn't it true you are pressing charges out of revenge? No, I answered calmly. I am pressing charges because my daughter committed a crime. Forgiving her as a mother does not mean excusing her actions as a citizen. The jury listened intently. I could see in their eyes that they understood. This was bigger than a family feud. It was about accountability. And accountability, at long last, was coming for Emily. The jury deliberated for only 2 hours before returning with their verdict. Guilty on all counts: embezzlement, fraud, and unauthorized use of financial instruments. Emily slumped in her chair, her shoulders shaking as she cried silently. Brian, who had attended every session, stood abruptly and stormed out, leaving her alone to face what came next. 1 week later, we gathered again in the courtroom for sentencing. The atmosphere was heavy, every whisper echoing off the walls. The judge, a stern man with a reputation for fairness, reviewed the evidence carefully before speaking. Miss Harper, this court has considered not only the magnitude of your crime, $580,000 stolen over a period of months, but also your lack of regard for the people whose livelihoods you endangered. Emily trembled, clutching the edge of the defense table. The judge's tone softened slightly. However, I also recognize that you are a first-time offender and that you have expressed remorse. Therefore, I sentence you to 6 years in federal prison, with the possibility of parole after 4 years for good behavior. Additionally, you must pay restitution in the full amount, plus interest and legal fees, totaling $720,000. During your parole period, you are prohibited from contacting your mother without explicit judicial approval. The words fell like stones into the silent room. 10 years without contact. Emily's sobs grew louder. The bailiff approached, placing handcuffs on her wrists. She turned to me, her eyes swollen with tears. Mom, please, forgive me. Please don't let this be the end. I stood, my voice steady but not unkind. I already forgive you, Emily, but forgiveness does not erase consequences. You are not in prison because I am cruel. You are in prison because you made choices that led you here. As she was led away, she kept her eyes on me, searching for a softness I could no longer afford to give. For the first time in her life, there was no manipulation, no excuses, only fear, and at last respect. That was our final exchange before the doors closed behind her. 6 months passed after the sentencing, and my life began to look completely different. Without the constant turmoil of Emily's demands, the air around me felt lighter. Harper Logistics, once strained by her theft, was thriving again. We secured 3 major contracts, expanded to 30 employees, and even opened a second office in a nearby city. For the first time in years, I could focus fully on the business I had built with my own hands instead of on the chaos of trying to hold my family together. But the most meaningful changes weren't professional. They were personal. I sold the old house where every room carried the echoes of arguments, slammed doors, and years of unspoken resentment. In its place, I purchased a penthouse in the heart of the city. The wide windows overlooked the skyline, and at night I could see the light stretching endlessly. It felt symbolic, a new perspective, a higher place, a life reclaimed. I began to explore parts of myself I had long buried under the weight of motherhood. I enrolled in a painting class on Tuesday evenings, booked a long-delayed trip to Europe, and started enjoying dinners at fine restaurants without guilt. I realized how many years I had denied myself joy in the name of sacrifice. Now, I allowed myself to live fully. Friends who had drifted away returned, drawn not just by my success but by the peace I radiated. They told me I seemed lighter, freer. And they were right. For the first time in 24 years, I was not just Emily's mother. I was Linda Harper, businesswoman, artist, traveler, a woman who had finally chosen herself. The lesson was clear: when you set boundaries, you don't lose love, you gain respect. And sometimes you even gain back your life. 4 years later, a letter arrived in the mail with a return address that made my heart skip. Federal Correctional Institution. My hands trembled as I opened it, knowing it was from Emily. The restraining order had kept us apart, but she had received special permission through her parole officer to send me this one letter. Her handwriting was smaller than I remembered, steadier somehow. "Dear Mom," it began, "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect a second chance. I only need you to know what these years have taught me." She wrote about the loneliness of prison, about the therapy sessions that forced her to face herself, and about the question a counselor had asked that shattered her: "Can you name a single time you truly sacrificed for your mother?" Emily admitted she could not once. She described the depression that followed, the nights she cried, until she had no tears left, and then the slow process of rebuilding. She had joined programs that taught responsibility, empathy, and gratitude. She had taken part in groups where she told her story to others, warning them of the dangers of entitlement. "I realized I wasn't your victim, Mom. I was your betrayer." Emily told me she was working at a bakery after her release, earning minimum wage, and sending every extra penny toward restitution. "It will take me years to pay you back," she wrote, "but I want you to know I'm trying. I want you to know your strength saved me. You didn't destroy me, you forced me to finally grow up." I finished the letter with tears running down my cheeks. They weren't tears of regret or anger. They were tears of relief, and maybe even of pride. For the first time in decades, I felt as if I had glimpsed the daughter I had always hoped Emily could become. As I folded Emily's letter and placed it gently back into the envelope, I felt something shift inside me. For years, I had carried the weight of believing that unconditional love meant sacrificing myself, that forgiveness meant excusing harm. But life had taught me a harder, truer lesson. Love without boundaries is not love at all, it is surrender. And when we surrender our dignity, we teach others to treat us with less than we deserve. Emily's story is not just about stolen money. It is about respect, about choices, and about the cost of confusing love with endless tolerance. In the end, she learned what I had always hoped she would: that actions have consequences, and that gratitude is the foundation of every healthy relationship. And I learned finally that protecting yourself is not selfish, it is the first step toward genuine peace. If you are watching this and you've ever struggled with setting boundaries with the people you love, let this story remind you saying no is sometimes the most loving thing you can do, because respect is what turns love into something lasting. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who might need it, and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. Your voice matters here.